everyone. Welcome. I'm very happy to be joined by Clay Kaufman, the head of school at the Cedar School based in Greenwich, Connecticut. It is a school, I'm sure Clay will be able to share a little bit more specifically, but for individuals with learning differences and a concept that we might touch on a little bit, but these individuals that are having a gap between their achievement and their ability. And for anyone that doesn't know, stay tuned through the rest of the conversation and we'll get to it. So welcome, Clay. I'm so glad to be talking with you today.
Thank you, Casey. I'm really happy to be here.
So I wanted to just start off, like the first thing when I got introduced to you, you recently opened the Cedar School. And so just first off, did the idea to open a school happen before the pandemic and just took years of preparation, or was this something that the pandemic kind of spurred on for you?
So yes and no. Honestly, it's really came from students and families. When I've been involved in education for students with dyslexia and language-based learning differences for quite a few years now, and I was the head of a school down in Maryland, a similar school. And when I got back to the New York area, the Connecticut area where I grew up, I was approached by so many parents saying that there are some wonderful K-8 schools that serve kids with language-based learning differences, but where are the local high schools? And there are some fabulous boarding schools that do a tremendous job with our students. There are some schools in the area, but really nothing right here locally. So I began speaking to consultants and attorneys and evaluators, testers, and found from everybody saying, for 20 years, we've been wanting a local school nearby that serves high school students. In the K-8 kids really need lots of reading instruction and lots of the basics in decoding and fluency and comprehension. But in high school, the students still need some support and a chance to focus on their strength areas. And so again, public schools do a great job for a lot of students. They're not for everybody. There's some wonderful private schools, so many of them around here, and they do a wonderful job, but like any place, it doesn't work for everybody. So this is just really trying to fill a gap for families and for students mostly. So really it comes from students. And it was an interesting year during the pandemic. I spent my time talking to families, talking to consultants, talking to testers, talking to almost anybody I could find about the school as we were trying to get it up and running. And it was a pretty efficient way to do it via Zoom during a pandemic. I could reach lots of people very, very easily. And so that was sort of fortuitous in that way. And we spent, again, lots and lots of time just talking about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it was easy to do that via Zoom from home.
You got to be opportunistic and silver linings. You got to make the best of the situations that are thrown your way. Something you brought up that I just think is so important. So like when New Frontiers first started, like one of the guiding ethoses was students should have choices that are similar to their peers and shouldn't be boxed in, limiting their choices. So for us, it was a lot of, I have to go to this college that offers this support program, and therefore my list is these 5 schools. And we always approach that as like, it gets a little sad that you're limiting your options because of that. I'm trying to expand that agency. And so just for anyone that's kind of listening, if anyone's thinking about the difference between the example you gave was like there's boarding schools that kids can go to. Why do you think it's so important for kids to have that choice of, and I'll guide the answer a little bit, but a little bit of normalcy of my learning disability doesn't have to equate to a boarding school. Why is that so important?
So you've asked a great question that has lots of different answers, and I'll try to be efficient in answering them. So first of all, I think that boarding schools are phenomenal for certain kids who want that experience, for whom that experience is going to be a good fit. And then we have a history of just fabulous boarding schools saving kids' lives and really doing really good work by them. But like in anything else in life, boarding school isn't the answer for everybody. And so I think what we're really looking for at the Cedar School is a solution for families who say, look, we have a very close-knit family and it's important that our child is here. Boarding school isn't an option for one reason or another for us, but mainstream public school or mainstream private school also isn't really an option. So what are we supposed to do? And this gets back into what you said in the very beginning. I just wanted to, give a brief once over of what we're doing here, because I think it pertains to your point. So we have bright college-bound students with mild to moderate language-based learning differences. So language-based learning differences means that expressive and receptive language. Dyslexia is one definition, one label that you might hear applied to language-based learning differences, but there are others that affect expressive and receptive language. They have trouble with their reading and writing. These are bright, creative kids who have wonderful ideas in their head, but often their frustration is when they write it down on paper, it doesn't come out as eloquent and sophisticated as it sounded in their head. And that's because of some of their reading and writing challenges, the language challenges. So as you said, these are students who have high ability, especially in language, in sort of vocabulary and verbal, in visual and spatial. But the processing speed, how quickly they can get it out, what it takes to get that language out of their brain is often slower, and not what you would expect to see with a student up here and their ability, but their processing speed is down here. The other piece, not to get too technical, but the working memory, as you temporarily store information, that tends to be a challenge for our students as well. So our poor students are great, they're bright, they're creative. When you talk to them, they seem like terrific kids. And when they try to create output, it doesn't come out the same way you would expect. And so often people assume these students, oh, well, maybe they're not trying that hard, or maybe they're not that bright after all, when they really are. So our kids are in the mild to moderate range, which means 2 to 3 grade levels behind in their core reading and writing areas. So these are kids who have ability, who with the right kind of multisensory teaching can do really, really well, but you need to put them in a place where they can show off their abilities and access the curriculum through their strengths. And that means the visuals and color coding and hands-on activities and experiential learning and music, and incorporating that into what they do on a daily basis. And frankly, the research is showing that all students actually benefit from that kind of approach. But the challenge in the world is you can't do that and also race through material and cover everything. And so for schools that are rethinking the stress that actually we're putting on kids of racing through material, 6 hours of homework a night, everybody's sort of rethinking that. And is really that the best way? Is that the best way to help our students learn? For our students, it absolutely is not. We really need to take our time and use the content as a vehicle for the skills that the students need to learn for college and for life. And so that's what we're here. Those are the kids, the students that we have. And to your point about kind of having a regular experience, well, that is the goal. That they should have sports, and we have clubs and activities. We're going to have a prom. They should have a regular high school experience. But what we are able to do is not only give them the sports that they need, but also play to their strengths. Let them have art every day, maybe twice a day. Let them go off and do internships. Have a field trip every single month. It doesn't take away from learning. It actually makes it easier to learn. Integrate the curriculum so the courses are overlapping, things like that.
You brought up so many good points I want to follow up on. So just first, and we can nerd out a little bit here. So working memory, for those that aren't as aware, working memory is one of the core executive functions that helps with reading comprehension. And so when you hear of language-based reading difficulties, you can infer sometimes that there's going to be some impact on working memory, but there's also a great, from the coaching side, working memory strategies tend to be writing more things down, referencing things that you put out in the world. And so just from your example, how much of a focus do you guys place on these executive functions? And how is that focus on a specific group of learners benefiting? How does that enable you guys as teachers and educators to target the design of the school more, readily.
Sure, exactly. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I'm an educator. I started out as a teacher. I've done admissions. I've done lots of different things. I'm not a psychologist, but in the what you're talking about, I think I can address a couple things. So, working memory is really critical. And so the way that you create information on paper or on the computer makes a big difference in how you're going to be able to remember it later or how it can help you. And this affects not just reading, but it affects math. If I ask you to multiply 2 times 21, you'd probably say, okay, well, 2 times 20 is 40. Let me store that temporarily. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, we've got 42. If your working memory is challenging for you, you get the 2 times 20 is 40. But then when you do the 2 times 1 is 2, where is that for? You don't have that. And so now you're getting the wrong answer. So there are interesting things that I've learned from people who are much smarter than me, who know much more than me, or much better trained than I am. But for example, what we would have our students do if we were doing a class in history on Thurgood Marshall, the visual cues make a big difference. So we might have in our classroom, we would have Thurgood Marshall's picture up on the screen on the wall. And the students might do a mind map where they literally would paste Thurgood Marshall's picture in the middle of the piece of paper. And then as they take notes, they do them with circles off circles. And it's all coming from looking at Thurgood Marshall the whole time. And when you're associating the words and the language with that visual, with that picture, then you are going to store it more efficiently. Then when you've got this mind map with all these circles, you can go in and color code them. And let's take all the information that relates to a particular aspect of Thurgood Marshall and color code it in one color. And then you can help organize the information. And that's part of the executive functioning too. So it's finding a way to give students skills that they can use in any class, in any job, anywhere they go in college, so that they are able to organize information, store it in a way that they can reach it more efficiently and pull it out when they need to.
And I love that, because for anyone listening, like in public school, and again, the same thing you said, every school has a group of people that benefit from that design. So anything that we're saying here, it's not to bash anything else. It's just what are the differences. That's the first step to figuring out the best place. But there might be some people that are like, oh yeah, I did that type of mind map project back when I was in 8th grade in history class. But I think that's one thing that's just important. Public schools try to teach to every type of learner and expose to multiple different ways, but there's not necessarily the consistency of accessing a specific way. And so mind mapping as a visual cue with color coding, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like something that's more embedded throughout the curriculum as a strategy, because we know it's tapping into the skill set of the population that attends the Cedar School, correct?
Exactly. And there are wonderful teachers in the public schools who do an incredible job inspiring students, but you're right, they don't necessarily have the training and they can't do this every day. They, if they have 2 students with dyslexia in the class,
there's less connection between them, right? So like a history teacher might be really driving that, but that doesn't mean the math teacher is using the same strategy, because there's different departments. And so it's just more disconnected. Whereas within like the Cedar School, you can have more global approaches to things. So
every minute of every day is
Yep.
multisensory. Every minute of every day, every class, everybody understands these students. And so they're getting the right supports throughout the day, which actually for students is a huge relief. And yes, there's a trade-off. Lots of kids, I don't blame them for wanting to be in the big public high school with the big band, and we're never going to have a football team, and we're not going to have 3,000 students. But there's a trade-off. And for so many students I've worked with, it's just such a relief to be able to know that all your teachers really understand you and providing you with the supports and pushing you toward independence, not just to give you the supports, but to help you as a student learn them and own them so that you can go off anywhere to college and use them independently.
And it's just so much of a chicken and an egg situation sometimes of, well, you want confidence in order to make social connections. So if you're not confident in school, you're going to struggle socially. But then also, if you're not socially thriving, then it can impact your confidence in school. And so this is why it often is, there's not a right answer for everyone. It's a journey towards that right answer. But you did bring up multisensory again. And so first off, if you could just explain to some people what that is. And then I'd love to hear about the trials and tribulations of starting a school. Like when you went to start, you just started recently, correct? Like, did you guys start off all in person?
We're in our 8th week, yes.
8th week. So like, did you time that purposely because multisensory tends to lend itself more to in person, or how do you see that adaptability occurring
Sure.
in more of a virtual environment for individuals if
Right.
that need came up again?
So one of the advantages of being very small in the beginning is that it's easier for us to be in person. We have all the safety protocols in place, and we're being very cautious and safe as we can be. So being small is a benefit, obviously. And so I think that this debate over online and virtual learning versus in-person learning is fascinating. Virtual learning worked incredibly well for a certain group of students. Virtual learning was a disaster for a large group of students. And so I'm not sure I'm qualified to say what the answer is ultimately, but I do know that being in person has made a huge difference. That personal approach, the chance to interact, to catch nuance, to be in the moment, especially in a multisensory environment, it really makes a difference to be here. So we are very grateful that we are able to be in person. Obviously, we have a backup plan should anything happen, but I don't think long-term that virtual learning necessarily is the best for our families, for our students. And I think this is another piece that I heard directly and indirectly from lots and lots of families, that our kids, students with learning differences, really struggled, most of them, during the pandemic because virtual learning just didn't do it in the same way.
And a lot of people and teachers were tossed for a major hurdle. I know I've seen just technology change drastically over the past year to try and catch up with virtual learning, but there tended to be almost one mode of instruction. It was look at the text on the screen or watch a YouTube video. It kind of went from the major extremes on either end, and all of those gray areas. It's our students don't necessarily know how to define it. They can be very black and white, a lot of people, but it is they need some help finding that gray area, seeing what works for them. So 8 weeks in operation, what are you looking forward to most in this year or the upcoming years? What's something that's...
I'm first of all just incredibly grateful to the families who took the leap of faith to join us this year. So we have 17 students, and we're looking to grow to somewhere between 100 and 160 students eventually. So I'm just first of all very grateful to this amazing staff we have who are cobbling together a brand new school. There's so many systems that you take for granted in a school that you have to create from scratch. So that's been a challenge, but the students have been wonderful. They've really rallied. They are working hard and taking it seriously and learning new skills pretty quickly. So I think we're all looking forward to growing. Having more students around is just always nice for everybody. And I know the students would love to have a bigger pool of students with them. And so that also makes it easier for the sports teams. And the prom is going to be much more fun when we're 100 students than it is when we're 17. So looking forward to that growth. We've had quite a few people coming through on tours. We've had students visiting already, some for immediate enrollment, some for next year. And so that's been exciting. And I think everybody's looking forward to that. I think also looking forward to when you make something from scratch like this, we really have a chance to do it as all schools want to be the best possible school they can be. Trying to learn from all the experts we have. We have wonderful people on our advisory board who are leaders in the field, and we're trying to learn from the best about what we can do to make this school a really terrific school. And part of that for me is the input from faculty and from students. So I don't view this as my school. I view this as our school, including the students. So we haven't picked a school mascot yet. The students are going to help us out with that. We sat down with the students and came up with a dress code that seemed to be acceptable to everybody. I find that including students in that conversation means that you're no longer going to end up with just fights every day over dress code, because you've already included the people who are most affected in the conversation. And honestly, most of the students are on the same page with what most schools want to have in terms of a dress code. And really, in terms of the clubs and activities, the sports, how we want this community to, what we want it to feel like, really getting input from everybody. So it's a collaborative decision making when it comes to shaping the school, with the goal of making it the best place it can possibly be to serve our students and to be a community where people appreciate each other and love coming to school every day.
And so that's a perfect segue. What I often share with people is like one of the most important thing about learning and mentoring or coaching, in the example of the work we do, is this kind of cultural resonance, and this sense of belonging, values of belonging. Um, and so as a leader of a new school, you only have so much control over the culture. It's a two-way street. Like you could try and select students based off of certain criteria to try and develop a culture, but at the same point, the students play an integral role, just like what you were saying. It's a little bit more abstract than like voting on a dress code. It's something that happens more organically. But what have you been maybe not surprised about, but like proud of how you're seeing, like how do you see the culture starting to form at the Cedar School? Like if there was something, and it's obviously going to continue to change, but if people came in and it's like one thing before the school started, but now they ask, like, what is the culture at the Cedar School? What would you share with them?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that is interesting is students with language-based learning differences tend to have a great deal of empathy. And so that's something we're really trying to celebrate here and help to foster. And so whatever we're doing throughout our school day, whether it's in class, whether it's in activities that we do, again, we're trying to think about how do we look out for the other people in our community, and what can we do to help think about the other, so that I like the word that you use, belonging. We want everybody to feel like they belong here, and that this is a school where they have a voice. Our student council is actually called the Student Voice Committee, and they've already taken some leadership role in helping plan some activities. And so developing that sense of empathy so that every person is valuable here, every person has different strengths, and we want to make sure that we give everyone a chance to show off those strengths, and that we can acknowledge that and appreciate the strengths of others. I've learned as a leader that the secret to leadership is surrounding yourself with really great people who know much more than you do and who are very passionate about what they do, and give them room, give them a structure, and give them room within that structure to run. And so I think we're trying to do that with both staff and students, and make sure that everybody realizes that they are appreciated. And I think that's one thing especially important for our students, who have often come from school situations where it isn't sort of tailored to the way they learn. And so they feel like they're not as good as everybody else, or that everybody else is beyond them. And with the saddest thing is that they then tend to think of their strengths. And we have great artists, and they have huge visual strengths, and their hands-on learning strengths. They tend to think of those as not as less important, because they aren't always fostered or celebrated in other kind of environments. And so part of it is here to let them realize that, wow, if this is a strength of yours, this is actually going to carry you really far. And it's interesting because high school has its challenges no matter where you are, but for most people, you go to college to study what you're really good at, right? Your favorite kinds of activities, things you have strengths. And then in life, I really hope that everybody goes and finds a job in an area of strength. We don't go to find a job and say, well, I'm really terrible at this, so I'm going to go off and do this all day long. We'd be miserable. So trying to help the students realize that by focusing on their strengths, not only are they legitimate strengths, but these are the areas they're going to probably spend the rest of their life working in. And I've met so many adults with dyslexia who didn't have great school experiences, but are in fields now that involve lots of hands-on learning, lots of arts and creativity, people doing video editing for Discovery Channel, people doing all sorts of incredible work in areas of strength that they love, and they're happy as they could be. They're very successful. And they didn't realize that that was actually a legitimate way of being successful when they were in school, because that wasn't sort of the model that was necessarily before them.
It's not what they were graded on.
Right.
It's not always what they were told was important. What they're told is important is getting that A. And so you look at your report card, and 5 of the classes are text based, and you get C's in them, and then 2 are visual arts based or other types of experiential learning. Just kind of looking at it, it's I have these 5 C's and I have 1 A.
Right.
And I love how you, one of the things that I just think is so important to highlight that makes me love working with people like you is I sometimes get that kid that slipped by in high school, now in college, dyslexia, and this is not just dyslexia, but any learning difference, learning disability. It can be very isolating and lonely, especially when you don't have the language to necessarily express how you're feeling. But there's plenty of students that I just sit there, and dyslexia is a perfect example, and we'll go read other people's discussion posts. Now, is someone without support who struggles with reading going to read peers' discussion posts online? Probably not, because they don't have the time to do it. But even just that aspect of seeing that they're writing is on level with their peers that may or may not have a diagnosis, and who cares necessarily. But just that little aspect of helping to see that you're not alone in this. And that's what's so great about like a community that can be centered around it.
Absolutely, no, I agree completely. And part of a big part of what we do is helping students help give students the tools that they need. So, for example, speech to text software can be terrific for our students. So they're thinking something in their head. If they try to write it, it doesn't come out the same. But you speak it into the computer, and there's some great programs now that do it better than they ever did. And so you can speak it, and then you can edit it from there. And I have former students who are now going off and being writers because they can. Their ideas are very good in their head, but they need that tool. And so you're basically giving them that the utility belt from the old Batman days, right? Of tools and strategies that they can use so they can do anything they want. And again, using strategies for listening to books on tape, so they can help while they read and listen. The research shows that makes a huge difference in vocabulary, a huge difference in reading comprehension. There are very basic skills and tools that students can use to be very successful in college and in life. And it's just a matter of helping them see what those tools are, which levels the playing field for them.
And also sometimes just hearing from someone that's been through life of, you don't need to long-term be able to necessarily write a 10-page research paper, because that's not what you want to go to college for. And sometimes just hearing from someone that's been through it, yes, you do need to learn how to write an email. You will probably use that skill for the rest of your life in some way or another. Do you need to be able to do a literature project? Maybe not. But also choose your major or your school based off of that consideration. But sometimes just hearing it's okay to have different skill sets. Yeah. And professionals like you helping them hear it, because people need to hear it more than once. They don't believe it.
We're right. And we're trying really hard to do that. And, so we have a big internship program every year. So for 2 weeks, the students go off and get jobs, a volunteer job somewhere in the community, doing anything they want, working for doctors, looking for a lawyer, working at an Audubon Society, working at a museum, at a school, working for an architect, working at a bakery, at a restaurant, whatever they want to do to give them some hands-on experiential learning opportunities in possible career areas, right? If you're going to go study architecture in college, wouldn't it be nice to know what an architect actually does every day, right? Before you do that. And also to put their skills into place in the real world. And so that kind of opportunity, we believe is just really important for students, because then they can discover, wow, I really love doing this. I love working outside every day. I love working in landscape design. I love what a judge does. And that, again, helps hopefully give them the confidence to realize that, oh, if I love that and I'm good at it, that's something I can do in college. And that could be my primary focus.
And so just with some, I always like to wrap these up this way. If you could give one piece of advice, it doesn't need to be for students, it could be for parents, colleagues, anything. Just what's like a piece of advice that you like to pass on to people in whatever area? Like what's just something, maybe one of your kind of guiding mottos of how you kind of lead life? What's something you like to pass on to
That's a
others?
great question. So I think I would say that the goal in life, while it feels like the goal is to fit in with everybody else, I think that I would encourage people, whether it's in finding the right school, finding the right college, finding the right job, the goal is really to find out what you love and fit where you fit, and really take time to find your passions. And there were, for decades in this country, people felt like, well, we're going to take one job right out of college and I'm going to stay there until I get my gold watch when I retire. And I know lots of people in my parents' generation who were miserable their whole career. It wasn't something they really wanted to do. And in my father's case, it was interesting. He was in public relations and he worked for companies for a long time, and he worked for some wonderful companies, but he was never really happy. In the last 10 years of his career, he started his own firm and chose the exact clients he wanted and did it his way. And he was not making necessarily as much money as he was before, but he was happier than he'd ever been. And for me, that's just a great model, that you don't have to fit in, because the way you're trying to fit in may not be what's right for you. So forge your own path. And again, even if it's elementary school, if the school you're in isn't right and you're miserable, well, then maybe it's just because the school you're in isn't right. And let's find a place, find a way where you can be happy. And it's just so important to invest the time and research and energy into figuring out where you will belong. To get back to the word you talked about at the beginning, find out where you belong, because then that is the right place, regardless of what everybody else is doing. If you're in the place where you belong, that is the right place for you.
I love that. I mean, it really, like, that's the fuel for grit and resilience, is belonging. Because then you'll take the bad, because the good is motivating. But if the good isn't motivating, why take the bad and shut down? And so that's just great piece of advice. I'll incorporate it myself. I'm glad I'm somewhere that I love and I'm happy, and so it'll keep me motivated to keep doing what I'm doing. But
Excellent.
thank you so much, Clay. Anyone that wants to check it out, what's the website if they want to check out Cedar School?
Sure, it's www.thecedarschool.org. Cedar is in the tree, CEDAR. www.thecedarschool.org. We're here in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we have mostly 9th and 10th graders this year. We'll be growing, and looking forward to, happy to talk to anybody who feels like this might be the right place.
Awesome. And then for anyone else that, whether you're watching this when it first comes out, we're going to be doing a collaborative webinar on a topic coming up. If you're seeing this after, it might already be on our YouTube page, so keep an eye out for that. Exploring a little bit more into the academic piece of what we talked about today. But thank you so much, Clay, today, and I look forward to future collaboration with you.
Thank you, Casey. Look forward to it.
All right.